The encyclopedia describes space as the boundless, three-dimensional extent in which objects and events have relative position and direction. The vast sky overhead, the eternal blue dotted with white cottony clouds, with sunlight in a golden hue around and what lies beyond, is space by common understanding. Stars and the moon that vanishes in broad daylight in the presence of the sun, but mysteriously appears every night as soon as the sun sets, have beckoned man to imagine and to try and define what lies beyond what can be seen. Far away in the galaxies that humans cannot see, or at distances that cannot be mapped. In mythology, these are celestial heavenly bodies. They are gods and demigods who need to be worshipped and satiated as per ancient religious customs. They cause storms, they cause earthquakes, famines to punish erring humans, and when they are happy, it is springtime. Yet from ancient time, man has tried to unravel the truth at what lies beyond what can be seen. For centuries, humans have studied the sky, and because of them was it proved that the earth moves on its own axis, the moon revolves around the earth, and the earth goes around the sun. All the planets and the sun. India has a rich history of space research. Aryabhatta, the first known Indian astronomer and the inventor of zero, had for the first time explained the solar and lunar eclipses. Bringing it out of mythological stories of Rahu and Ketu, he ascribed scientific background to the phenomenon. He had correctly insisted that the earth rotates on its axis on a daily basis, and that the apparent movement of the stars is a relative motion caused by the rotation of the earth. This was contrary to the then prevailing view that the sky rotated and the earth was static. In the first chapter of Aryabhatta, he gives the number of rotations of the earth in a yuga. Independent India's first Indian satellite was appropriately named Aryabhatta, in accordance to the ancient astronomer's contribution to space research.
We are not in the space race to do fancy things like landing a man on the moon or landing men, orbiting men around the earth. But we want to use space technology for the development of the country, to help the common man in his endeavors to communicate, to educate, etc., health. But today, we have done more than that.
But modern space research started in India in the 1920s. But it would take decades before the institutionalized probe into space-related activities would gain nationwide attention. The first milestone in Indian space exploration was the establishment of the Indian National Committee for Space Research, or INCOSPAR, by then Prime Minister Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, along with scientist Vikram Sarabhai in the year 1962.
ISRO started, as you know, with the vision of Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, and he thought this vantage point of space could have a very, very interesting use for this country. So he thought that we should build this capability, because India is a developing country at that time, 1960s, I am talking of early 60s, and obviously our developmental needs were very different from the United States and the then Soviet Union.
Tumba in those days used to be a tiny village on the outskirts of Thiruvananthapuram in Kerala. But Tumba was different from other fishing villages in the area.
Then he found that there is this Tumba equatorial region, which is a geomagnetic equator which passes over that land, and because of that there are some very interesting physical phenomena in the atmosphere and ionosphere above. So he thought, as a first step, let us explore this with rockets.
It was very close to the Earth's magnetic equator, and so Vikram Sarabhai met the local bishop, Reverend Peter Bernard Pereira, to set up his dream space research center in the village. The fishing community in Tumba was primarily Christian, and the Reverend offered the church for the sake of science. Thus began space research of modern India at St. Mary Magdalene Church, which was rechristened as Tumba Equatorial Rocket Launch Station, or TERLS. The prayer room of the church became the laboratory of APJ Abdul Kalam. It was later named the Vikram Sarabhai Space Center.
Vikram Sarabhai telling people after a few years, okay, India has to develop a capability to launch satellites. Why? Because using the satellites, India can leapfrog in terms of development in the field of education, communication, and telemedicine, etc., etc. In other words, you don't have to build the ground infrastructure which other nations built, and then when the satellite came, they had to change everything. Whereas we have almost a virgin land where we can straight away go to the higher technology. So he sold the idea of satellite development and satellite launching for the purpose of national development.
Incospar launched India's first rocket in 1963 from Tumba. By the end of the 60s, Incospar grew to become the Indian Space Research Organization, or ISRO. Around the same time, the Government of India formed the Space Commission for Policy Formulation. Research and execution of space-related enterprises got a boost in the country. Over the next 48 years, ISRO improvised and developed technology, launching several indigenously created vehicles into space. From the modest start of launching Aryabhatta, the first Indian satellite using a Russian rocket in 1975, India has certainly come a long way. Aryabhatta provided India with the basis of learning satellite technology and design. Same year, ISRO along with NASA developed means of using space communication system for TV broadcasting that was acronymed as SITE, or the Satellite Instructional Television Experiment. The one-year program covering Indian villages and districts was to experiment usage of satellite broadcasting for mass education. For the next 2 years, 1976 and 77, ISRO launched Satellite Telecommunication Experiments Project, or the STEP, as a sequel to SITE. It used satellite technology to enhance domestic communication. As the 1970s wound up, ISRO was emboldened to create the first indigenous satellite vehicle that was launched from Sriharikota in Andhra Pradesh in 1980. SLV-3 successfully placed the Rohini satellite, or the RS-1, in orbit, making India only the 6th member of an exclusive club of spacefaring nations. But it was time for ISRO to move a step forward with its satellite broadcast program. Having experimented with SITE and STEP, the Indian National Satellite System, or the INSAT, was commissioned in 1983 to work on broadcasting, telecommunication, meteorology, and rescue operations. Over the next few decades, ISRO successfully propelled a number of INSAT satellites into space, making it the largest domestic communication system in the Asia-Pacific region. It was time for an attempt to make manned mission to space. The first Indo-Soviet manned space mission was launched in 1984. Air Force test pilots Rakesh Sharma and Ravish Malhotra went through rigorous trainings for almost 2 years in the Soviet Union. Finally, Rakesh Sharma was chosen to be the first Indian to go up into space.
ऊपर से भारत कैसा दिखता है आपको?
जी मैं बगैर किसी झिझक के कह सकता हूँ कि सारे जहां से अच्छा.
He flew aboard the Soviet rocket Soyuz T-11 as part of a 3-member Soviet-Indian crew. Ravish Malhotra stayed on ground to back him throughout the mission.
You know, right from the beginning we knew that one of us is, so it's practically like the toss of a coin. And that's the way life is.
Augmented Satellite Launch Vehicle, or the ASLV program, started in 1987. It supported a larger payload than the SLV-3. It was also the beginning of ISRO's endeavour to build low-cost projects. From March 1987, 4 developmental flights were launched under the program. The next big leap into space was taken in the new century. In October 2008, the first lunar mission was launched by ISRO. Chandrayaan took off from the Satish Dhawan Space Center and it continued to operate for nearly a year, till August 2009. The project had been announced by the then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee as part of his Independence Day speech in the year 2003. It took the premier space research organization 5 years to fulfill that dream. The lunar project discovered a large number of water molecules on the moon, marking it as its greatest achievement. ISRO now plans to launch its second lunar mission, Chandrayaan-2, in 2018.
So Sarabhai started working on given ISRO a program for development of launch vehicle. SLV-3 was the first one. You remember Dr. Kalam was the project director of SLV-3, which was successfully ushered India into the rocket age, satellite launch vehicle age. And then we went into the ASLV, which improved the capability of the SLV from 40 kilograms to 110 or 150 kilograms. And then we went into PSLV, which today is a workhorse for the Indian launchers, particularly the polar launches.
6 years after Chandrayaan went to the moon, in 2014, India's first interplanetary mission, Mangalyaan, was launched. ISRO became the 4th space agency to reach Mars after the Soviet space program, NASA and the European Space Agency. Mangalyaan was also a big achievement as it gained worldwide repute for being the least expensive Mars mission till date.
Chandrayaan-1 made a big turning and Mangalyaan has made it now. Now we are very confidently we are able to tell, sitting in this place, to my team, I think we must be able to make minimum 1 satellite per month. I think that is a remarkable change we have done. And that 2 satellites of 35 years back, a very modern satellites. Today, each one of the satellites what we make is a state-of-the-art sophisticated satellites. Is an order complex than what we have done those days.
When we go for Chandrayaan or when we go to Mangalyaan, we demonstrate to the world that we are capable of reaching any parts of the solar system. And so, if you are going to have a major program which involves a lot of resources and therefore no one country can do it, and we need to have a consortium, India can be a very meaningful and effective consortium member.
On 15th of February 2017, ISRO launched 104 satellites in a single PSLV rocket to create a world record.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now it's 1, it's 2.
So S400 ignited and safely cleared the umbilical pedestal.
7.
Its heaviest rocket, Geosynchronous Satellite Launch Vehicle Mark III, was launched on 5th of June 2017 and placed a communication satellite GSAT-19 into orbit.
Motors going through the atmosphere.
With this launch, ISRO became capable of launching 4-ton heavy satellites into space.
I think every stage of ISRO's achievement is the biggest achievement, simply because at that particular point in time, that is the most important. When we launched the Aryabhat, it was a big achievement for us. When SLV-3 was launched, it was a big achievement at that particular point. When we launched the PSLV, at that time it was biggest. In GSLV Mark I, biggest. So if you really look at it, we were evolving.
India's program for many, many years was just on utilitarian space. It was not on exploration. Exploration came much later. And what we did was, over a period of time, build a fantastic capability to build giant rockets. We've seen the recent one, GSLV, going up with huge tonnage of weight that would take large spacecraft into space, and also build really, really sophisticated satellites, not just for communication, but for remote sensing, but for navigation. We have got the state of the art right now.
Space exploration comes at an enormous cost, and the technological complexity involved keeps it confined to government agencies and institutions. But space is increasingly opening up. Over the years, NASA has started to engage private enterprises to build its launchers and satellites. So did the European Space Agency. Now, with space technology truly breaking free from the constraints and domination of government funding and control, private bid in this field is growing by the day. In this atmosphere, India too is gearing up to open up space exploration to private enterprise.
This has been a great journey. After we started in early 2011, we've managed to find the support, we've managed to find the people, we managed to find the partners and the investors who would support such a journey.
Team Indus, powered by the youth and supported by ISRO, is on its last leg of the moon mission. This is part of the Google Lunar X Prize. In 2007, Google Lunar announced a challenge to develop low-cost robotic space exploration using 90% private funds. This robotic spacecraft would have to land on the moon on a specified site and move for at least 500 meters in a controlled manner and transmit images of the lunar surface that would mark its arrival and ending of the journey. The grand prize of $20 million would go to the first team to successfully complete the challenge, and a second prize of $5 million would go to the runners-up. Team Indus has so far made it to the final 5 entries out of the 32 teams from all across the world who took up the challenge. Team Indus bagged the Lunar X Prize for designing the best moon lander.
What is it that is scribbled out here? This looks like the moonshot.
Exactly. So this is literally the map of our moonshot. So this is around where the PSLV leaves us, at about 880 kilometers above the Earth's surface. So once it leaves us here, we start our first orbit, which is 880 by 70,000 kilometers. This is where we're trying to acclimatize our spacecraft to the environment of space itself, because it's never been here before, right? We figure out how it needs to be oriented and everything, make sure that the solar panels are pointing towards the sun. And then once we're back in this position again, we do a propulsive burn and increase this orbit by...
You got to tell me, what is the distance from here to here? This is 380,000 kilometers?
No. So the 380,000 kilometers is a direct line of sight.
All right.
Right? Roughly based on our trajectory, we'd be covering about 10 lakh kilometers, right? Because we're going there a lot slower. Thing is, if you want to go a direct line of sight, you need a lot more fuel, a much bigger rocket and a spacecraft. this trajectory is optimized for the weight of our spacecraft. We're going to be 600 kilograms when we launch. Right? Most of that is actually fuel. So we've optimized, looked at the size of our spacecraft, the weight of our spacecraft, made sure that this is the most optimal trajectory.
And let me just get this clear. It is, in comparison, if you have to send something, it looks easy. The moon looks so big here, and it looks like, wow, I can just shoot the spacecraft and it should go in a straight linear direction. But I'm told it is as difficult as putting, one of these 1 rupee coins 25 kilometers away and then taking, sharpshooting it and finding that mark. Is it as difficult as that when you send a spacecraft into this?
Actually, it is, because everything in space is tough, because you need to be extremely precise with your calculations, your maneuvers. Need to be to the nth decimal. It needs to be correct. Only then can you manage to achieve results, is through accuracy.
So if you send this out here, and if you do it too quickly, how long will it take from here to here? 21 days or?
So this is the 110-hour journey, right? From here. So we do a propulsive one here.
Right.
And
that's 5.5 days.
Yes. So that breaks us away from the Earth's gravity and starts moving us towards the moon, where we can get caught by its gravity.
Now,
so
how long will this process of getting caught by the moon's gravity happen?
So like I said, so this is about 110 hours.
No, once you get to the moon.
Once we get to the moon, this should be about 9 to 10 hours we could take and reduce our orbits to...
So proportionately, what you see, these circles getting slower till you lock on, and then you will land on the moon.
Yeah, so once we're around the moon, we are in a parking orbit of 100 by 100 kilometers, right? So we need to wait and make sure that our selected landing site is having lunar dawn on it.
Descent, depending upon the various geometries, when we get into the sphere of influence of the moon and get around moon, the phase of the moon will be different. Phase of the moon, why it is important is, we have to wait for the dawn line from the capture to move towards our landing site. We plan to land immediately after dawn, because the lunar day is 14 days, Earth days long, and it is best around dawn, and we want to finish all the work within the first few, maybe 3 or 4 days.
Now if they're successful in launching Ek Choti Si Asha, ECA, meaning a small hope, they would achieve what even ISRO couldn't do so far.
So these are all part of it, and this is where I see India playing its own unique and important role as one of the leading spacefaring nations of the world. And you people, like youngsters of the next generation, certainly have a lot to get experience from this kind of a thing. Very exciting period, exceptional period, and I think all we can say, we previous generation have just laid the foundation for it. You have to build it up. The challenge is with you.
When you go up there, it's all the same. There are no boundaries, there are no countries, whether it's India, Pakistan, there's no boundary like it was before pre-partition.
Team Indus's achievement would not only put India on a new platform of space research and exploration, but it would also give a new impetus to India's journey into space.